I was grading essays when my phone rang. Connecticut area code. I hadn't heard from anyone in Connecticut in 15 years, not since my father told me I was dead to him. The lawyer's voice was professional, detached. "Miss Bennet, your father is dying. He's asking for you." I should have hung up, but I didn't. 3 weeks later, I sat at his funeral, listening to 200 people mourn a man who'd left me nothing. What they didn't know was that I'd just inherited $3.8 million from someone who actually loved me. If you like this story, hit subscribe. If you don't like it, hit like. Why? Because if you don't like it but still watch till the end, you're lying to yourself. And people who lie to themselves never admit they enjoyed it. But if you genuinely liked it, then go ahead and subscribe already. And to understand why I say, from someone who truly loved me, I need to take you back to where it all began. I was grading essays in my tiny Oregon apartment when my phone rang. Unknown number. Connecticut area code. I hadn't heard from anyone in Connecticut in 15 years, not since the day my father told me I was dead to him. My hand shook as I answered. "Miss Bennet? This is James Whitmore, your father's attorney. Your father is dying. Pancreatic cancer. He has 6 weeks, maybe less. He's asking for you." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my kitchen table, red pen frozen over an 8th grader's analysis of Romeo and Juliet. "Why?" I heard myself ask. "I'm sorry? Why does he want to see me?" A pause. Papers shuffling. "He said there are estate matters to discuss. He was quite insistent that I reach you." Estate matters. Even dying, my father was thinking about control. "Miss Bennet, I understand this is unexpected. When does he want me to come?" "As soon as possible. He's at home under hospice care. His condition is deteriorating rapidly." I should have said no. I should have hung up. I should have done what Richard Bennett had done to me 15 years ago and pretended he didn't exist. But I didn't. Because 15 years ago, I'd been 19 years old, home from my freshman year of college, and my father had given me an ultimatum. Transfer to UConn. Business major. After graduation, you'll join Bennett Financial Group. He'd sat across from me in his mahogany study, scotch in hand, completely certain I'd obey. "Dad, I'm majoring in English. I want to teach." His face had hardened. "I didn't work 40 years building this company so my daughter could waste her education playing schoolteacher. It's not playing. It's what I want." "Then you're on your own. If you won't join the family business, you're not part of this family. Do you understand me?" I'd thought he was bluffing. By noon the next day, my college fund was gone. Tuition payment, dorm deposit, everything. Emptied. When I called him, he answered with 3 words. "You're dead to me." I'd left Connecticut with $2,000 in savings and a father who'd erased me from his life because I wouldn't become who he wanted me to be. Now, 15 years later, he was dying, and he wanted to see me. "Miss Bennet?" James Whitmore was still waiting. I looked around my apartment. 400 square feet above a yoga studio. Folding table desk from Target. Garage sale couch. I'd built this life from nothing, from substitute teaching and student loans and sheer stubbornness. I'd become a teacher anyway. I'd made something of myself. Without him. Without his money. Without his approval. And some small, stupid part of me, the 19-year-old who'd spent 15 years wondering if she'd made the right choice, wanted him to know that. "I'll come," I said. "I'll book a flight tomorrow." "Thank you, Miss Bennet. I'll email you the details." We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at my stack of ungraded essays. 32 8th graders who thought Romeo was dumb for dying over a girl he just met. They weren't wrong. I opened my laptop and booked a one-way ticket to Hartford. I didn't know how long I'd stay, or what I'd find when I got there, or if this was the worst decision I'd ever made. All I knew was that after 15 years of silence, my father was dying. And like a fool, like the daughter who'd never quite stopped hoping he'd see her for who she really was, I was going back. I should have known better. He'd already shown me exactly who he was. The house looked exactly the same. That was somehow worse. I stood on the circular driveway, taxi pulling away behind me, staring at the colonial I'd grown up in. White columns, black shutters, manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly rent. It looked like a photograph from a magazine about New England wealth. Perfect, cold, empty. I'd taken a taxi from the airport because no one had offered to pick me up. James Whitmore's email had included the address, as if I could forget, and a polite note that hospice nurses were on site 24 hours. Nothing about Victoria meeting me. Nothing about welcome home. Not that this had ever really been home. The front door opened before I could knock. Mrs. Chen stood there, older than I remembered, her black hair now streaked with silver. She'd been the Bennetts' housekeeper for 30 years. She'd made me soup when I had the flu. She'd helped me with my college applications in secret. Miss Rachel. Her face crumpled. It's been so long. She pulled me into a hug, and I smelled the same lavender detergent she'd always used. For a moment, I let myself hold on. Hi, Mrs. Chen. Come in, come in. You must be tired from the flight. She took my small suitcase, I'd only packed for a few days, and led me inside. The foyer hadn't changed. Same marble floors, same crystal chandelier, same gallery wall of family photographs climbing the staircase. I made myself look at them. Victoria at her law school graduation, Dad's arm around her shoulders. Victoria and Dad at some charity gala, both in black tie. Victoria shaking hands with the governor. Victoria, Victoria, Victoria. There were a few old photos of me, school portraits from elementary years, back when Mom was still alive, but nothing recent. It was like I'd stopped existing after age 10. Rachel? I turned. Victoria stood in the doorway to Dad's study, wearing tailored gray pants and a silk blouse. She looked exactly like what she was, a successful 35-year-old executive, polished, put together. Everything our father had wanted in a daughter. Victoria. Hi. You came. She said it like she hadn't been sure I would. How was your flight? Fine. It was fine. Awkward silence. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. I didn't know how to talk to my own sister. He's upstairs, Victoria said finally. The hospice nurse is with him. He sleeps most of the day now, but he's lucid when he's awake. How long has he known? About the cancer? 3 months. He didn't want anyone to know until... She trailed off. Until it was too late. Until there was nothing anyone could do. Does he know I'm coming? James told him you'd agreed to visit. He seemed... Victoria hesitated. Satisfied. Not happy. Not relieved. Satisfied. Like he'd won some kind of negotiation. I thought about turning around, getting back in a taxi, flying home to Oregon and my 8th graders and my small, quiet life where nobody measured my worth by their own ambitions. But I'd come this far. I'm sorry about Aunt Claire, I said, remembering. I didn't know she'd passed until I looked her up online. I would have come to the funeral if... It was small, Victoria interrupted. Just close family. She left everything to some art foundation in Boston. Very Claire. Dad was annoyed she didn't leave anything to the business. Of course he was. Even at his own sister's funeral, Richard Bennett had been thinking about money. She always liked you, Victoria added, something unreadable in her voice. She used to ask about you. Before you left. Before Dad erased me, she meant? Mrs. Chen appeared with a glass of water I hadn't asked for. Miss Rachel, can I get you anything? Are you hungry? I'm fine. Thank you. Your old room is ready if you want to rest before. I'll see him now. I set down the water glass. Is he awake? Victoria checked her phone. The nurse texted 10 minutes ago. He's up. Okay. Rachel. Victoria's voice stopped me at the base of the stairs. He looks different. The cancer. Just be prepared. I nodded. Climbed the stairs past photographs of a family I'd never really belonged to. At the top of the landing, I paused outside the door to my father's bedroom. I could hear the soft beep of medical equipment, the hiss of an oxygen machine. 15 years. 15 years I'd imagined this moment. What I'd say, how he'd react, whether he'd apologize or explain, or finally, tell me he'd been wrong. I knocked softly and pushed open the door, and saw my father for the first time in 15 years. He looked smaller. Dying does that to people. My father, Richard Bennett, the man who'd built a financial empire, who'd commanded boardrooms, who'd always seemed larger than any space he occupied, lay propped against white pillows, an oxygen tube in his nose, his skin the color of old parchment, but his eyes were still sharp, still cold. Rachel. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement, like I was a subordinate arriving late to a meeting. Dad. The word felt strange in my mouth. Foreign. I hadn't said it in 15 years. A hospice nurse sat in the corner, monitoring equipment. She glanced up, gave me a small, sympathetic smile, then quietly left the room. The door clicked shut behind her. Took you long enough, my father said. His voice was thin, strained by the effort of breathing, but the edge was still there. I came as soon as I heard. 15 years, Rachel. You could have called. The audacity of it nearly knocked me backwards. You told me I was dead to you, and you let me believe it. I stared at him. This was what he'd called me back for? To blame me for the silence he'd created? I'm here now, I said carefully. What did you want to discuss? Something flickered across his face. Satisfaction, maybe. He'd always liked getting to the point. I asked you here because there are things to settle before I die. My estate. The business. I want everything to be clear. Okay. Victoria will take over as CEO of Bennett Financial Group. The transition is already underway. She'll inherit the house, the investment portfolio, the company shares, everything. He paused, watching my face, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give him one. I didn't come here expecting your money, Dad. Good. He shifted against the pillows, wincing. Because you're not getting any of it. Victoria stayed. She learned the business. She built something. She made something of herself. And I didn't. He didn't say it, but it hung in the air between us. She deserves it more, he finished. 15 years. I'd come back after 15 years, and this was what he wanted to tell me. Not that he'd missed me. Not that he'd made a mistake. Just one final confirmation that I'd failed to measure up. I built a life too, I said quietly. It just wasn't the one you wanted. You're a school teacher in the middle of nowhere. That's not building something. That's hiding. The words should have hurt. Maybe once they would have, but I'd spent 15 years learning that my father's opinion of me wasn't truth. It was just his disappointment that I'd refused to be molded into his image. Is that all? I asked. He looked almost surprised, like he'd expected me to argue, to beg, to prove myself worthy. That's all. James Whitmore will handle the paperwork. Victoria has copies of everything. You can see yourself out. I stood there for a moment, looking at the man who'd raised me and rejected me, and called me back across the country just to reject me again. Goodbye, Dad. Rachel. His voice stopped me at the door. It didn't have to be this way. I turned back. For one brief, foolish second, I thought he might actually apologize. If you'd just done what I asked, he said. If you'd joined the company like I wanted, you could have had all of this. It was your choice to throw it away. Even dying, Richard Bennett couldn't admit he'd been wrong. I walked out of his room without another word. Victoria was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her face carefully neutral. She'd probably heard everything. The walls in this house had never been as thick as people thought. Rachel, I'm leaving in the morning. I moved past her toward the front door. Tell him I said goodbye. I should have left Connecticut that night. I should have gotten in a taxi, gone to a hotel, flown back to Oregon on the first available flight. Instead, I stayed. Some part of me still hoping that maybe, before he died, my father would see me. I should have known better. He'd already shown me exactly who he was. 3 days later, he was still alive. Barely. But alive enough to orchestrate one final performance. I'd planned to leave that first morning. I'd even called for a taxi. But Victoria had knocked on my door. My childhood bedroom, preserved like a museum exhibit from 2009, and asked me to stay. He wants to go over the will officially. With James Whitmore. He wants you there. Why? He already told me I'm getting nothing. I know, but he's insisting. Please, Rachel. It's 3 more days at most. The doctors said. She'd stopped, her composure cracking slightly. It won't be long. So I'd stayed, avoiding my father, eating Mrs. Chen's cooking, sleeping in my old bed and staring at posters of bands I'd loved at 17. And now, 3 days later, I sat in my father's study across from James Whitmore while my father was wheeled in by a hospice nurse, oxygen tank rattling beside his wheelchair. This room, mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with awards and certifications. This was where he'd told me I was dead to him. This was where every important Bennett family decision had been made. This was where Richard Bennett wanted to deliver his final verdict. Thank you all for being here, James Whitmore said, opening a leather portfolio. He was maybe 60, gray-haired, professionally sympathetic. He'd probably done this 100 times. Richard has asked me to review the provisions of his last will and testament while he's still able to participate in the discussion. Victoria sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap. She looked uncomfortable. I almost felt sorry for her. The estate is substantial, James continued. I'll outline the primary assets and their designated beneficiaries. He pulled out a document, began reading. The primary residence at 47 Woodland Drive, Fairfield, Connecticut. Appraised value, $1.2 million. Beneficiary, Victoria Ann Bennett. I kept my face neutral. Bennett Financial Group. Richard currently holds 60% controlling shares. Estimated value, $3.1 million. Beneficiary, Victoria Ann Bennett, contingent upon board approval of CEO transition. Victoria's breath caught slightly. She'd known this was coming, but hearing the numbers made it real. Investment portfolio, currently held at Morgan Stanley. Value, approximately $540,000. Beneficiary, Victoria Ann Bennett. James went through the rest. The cars, the art collection, the country club membership, the life insurance policy. Everything had Victoria's name next to it. And for Rachel Ann Bennett, James said finally, his voice careful, there are no designated assets at this time. At this time. Like there might be later. Like this was temporary. It wasn't. That's the formal outline, James said. Rachel, you have the legal right to contest the will if you believe. She won't contest it. My father's voice was a rasp, but still authoritative. He looked at me from his wheelchair, eyes sharp despite the oxygen tube, despite the way death was hollowing him out. Will you, Rachel? Everyone was looking at me. James, professionally curious. Victoria, anxiously guilty. My father coldly certain. I could have fought. I could have hired a lawyer, dragged this out, made everyone miserable. But what would I be fighting for? A relationship that had been dead for 15 years? Recognition from a man who'd made it clear I'd never be enough? No, I said quietly. I won't contest it. James looked surprised. Miss Bennet, you should take time to consider. I don't need time. It's his money. He can do whatever he wants with it. My father smiled. Actually smiled. Like I'd finally done something that pleased him. You see? He said to James. I raised her to be practical at least. The words landed like a slap. Even now, even in this moment, he couldn't just let me have dignity. He had to frame my acceptance as obedience, as a lesson he'd taught me. Victoria stayed, my father continued, his voice getting stronger, like this speech was what he'd been conserving energy for. She learned the business from the ground up. She sacrificed. She proved herself. That's what leadership looks like. He turned to me. You ran away the first time things didn't go your way. You chose to teach children instead of building something real. You wasted your potential because you were too proud to admit I knew what was best for you. The room was silent. She deserves this, my father said, gesturing to the documents in James's hands. And you deserve exactly what you're getting. Nothing. Victoria made a small sound. Small. Dad, it's okay, I said, standing up. He's right about one thing. I did choose. I chose freedom over his approval, and I'd make the same choice again. I looked at my father one last time. You think you're punishing me, but you're just proving I was right to leave. I walked toward the door. Rachel. My father's voice followed me. Not apologetic. Annoyed. Sit down, we're not finished. Yes, we are. I closed the study door behind me, walked past the photographs of Victoria's achievements, past Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, straight out the front door into the cold Connecticut air. I called a taxi from the driveway. Victoria came out 5 minutes later, wrapping her cardigan around herself against the October wind. You don't have to leave right now. Yes, I do. Rachel, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want. I know. And I did. Victoria hadn't asked to be the golden child any more than I'd asked to be the disappointment. It's not about you. The taxi pulled up. I grabbed my suitcase from where I'd left it by the door. He's dying, Victoria said softly. You might not get another chance to... To what? Have him tell me again that I'm worthless? I'm good, thanks. I got in the taxi and didn't look back. I walked out of that study knowing I'd never speak to my father again. I was right. He died 4 days later. He died 4 days later. I was back in Oregon, teaching a unit on To Kill a Mockingbird, when Victoria called. Rachel. Her voice was thick, unsteady. He's gone. This morning. He just stopped breathing. I stood in the hallway outside my classroom, phone pressed to my ear, and felt nothing. Rachel? Are you there? I'm here. The funeral is Saturday. Will you come? I should have said no. I'd already said goodbye. I'd already walked away. There was nothing left between Richard Bennett and me except 15 years of silence and one final confirmation that I'd never been enough. But Victoria's voice, raw, exhausted, alone, made me say yes. I'll be there. I flew back to Connecticut 2 days later. The house felt different with death in it. Quieter, heavier. The hospice equipment was gone. The hospital bed removed. It was like my father had been erased as efficiently as he'd erased me from family photographs. Victoria met me at the door. She looked terrible. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes swollen from crying. This was the sister I barely knew. Not the polished COO, but the daughter who'd just lost her father. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Mrs. Chen appeared, pulled me into another hug. She was crying too. He was difficult, but he was ours, she said softly. We'll miss him. Would we? I wasn't sure. Victoria led me upstairs. Do you want to see him? Before the funeral home? I didn't, but I nodded anyway. My father's body lay in his bed, hands folded across his chest, already taking on the waxy stillness of death. Someone had closed his eyes. He looked peaceful. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no closure. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where something should have been. Victoria stood beside me, tears sliding down her face. I know he wasn't. I know things were complicated between you two. But he was my dad. He was... Her voice broke. I'm going to miss him. And I realized, with a strange clarity, that Victoria had loved him. Really loved him. Not because he'd given her everything, but because he was her father and she'd never known anything else. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Are you? She looked at me, not accusing, just curious. Do you feel anything at all? I made myself be honest. No, and I feel guilty about that. Victoria nodded slowly. He wasn't easy to love? No, he wasn't. We stood there together in the silence, two daughters shaped by the same father in completely different ways. Will you stay? Victoria asked. For the funeral? I know you don't owe us anything, but I don't want to do this alone. I looked at my father's body one last time. Richard Bennett. Brilliant, cruel, uncompromising to the end. He'd died thinking he'd won, thinking he'd proven his point, thinking I'd come crawling back someday, desperate for his approval. He'd been wrong, but Victoria wasn't him. I'll stay, I said. Thank you. She squeezed my hand, and for just a moment, we weren't the golden child and the disappointment. We were just two sisters who'd lost a father, whether we wanted to or not. That night, in my childhood bedroom, I thought about Aunt Claire. She'd died 8 months ago. 8 months before my father. I hadn't known until Victoria mentioned it. I'd missed her funeral. Missed the chance to say goodbye to the only person in the Bennett family who'd ever truly seen me. Victoria had said Claire left everything to an art foundation, that she'd died quietly, without drama. That sounded like Claire. Always on the margins of the family, always the one who didn't quite fit. Like me. I wish she were here. She would have known what to say. She would have understood that you could love someone and never be able to make them love you back. That sometimes walking away was the only way to survive. But Claire was gone, and so was my father. And I was left standing in the wreckage of a family that had never quite known what to do with me. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. I had 3 days to figure out how to grieve a man who'd spent 15 years pretending I didn't exist. 200 people came to my father's funeral. I knew maybe 5 of them. The church was enormous, white columns, stained glass, the kind of New England Protestant architecture that screamed old money and respectability. Richard Bennett had been a pillar of the Fairfield business community. Of course, his funeral would be packed. I sat in the 3rd row, not the first. That was reserved for immediate family, which apparently meant Victoria and my father's business partners. I sat behind them, alone, wearing a black dress I'd bought at a department store that morning because I hadn't owned anything funeral appropriate. Victoria sat in the front pew, flanked by executives from Bennett Financial Group. She wore a tailored black suit and carried herself with the composure of someone who'd spent her entire life learning to perform grief correctly. The service was exactly what I'd expected. A minister who'd probably met my father twice talked about his dedication to business, his commitment to excellence, his legacy of leadership. Several colleagues stood up to share stories about Richard's vision, his integrity, his mentorship. No one mentioned that he'd disowned his youngest daughter for wanting to be a teacher. Then Victoria rose to give the eulogy. She walked to the pulpit slowly, clutching a folded piece of paper. For a moment, I thought she might break down, but she didn't. She unfolded the paper and began to read. "My father was a remarkable man," she said, her voice steady. "He built Bennett Financial Group from nothing. He taught me everything I know about business, about leadership, about dedication." She talked about Sunday dinners where he'd quiz her on quarterly reports, about him teaching her to read financial statements when she was 12, about the way he'd believed in her potential even when she doubted herself. She talked about the father I'd never had. Not once did she mention my name. I don't think she meant to hurt me. I think, in her grief, I simply didn't exist. I'd been absent for 15 years. Why would I be part of the story she told? But sitting there, listening to her describe a father who sounded nothing like the man who'd told me I was worthless, I felt the absence of myself like a physical thing. The service ended. We drove to the cemetery in a procession of black cars. At the burial, I stood apart from the family cluster. Victoria was surrounded by colleagues offering condolences. I watched them lower my father's casket into the ground and felt nothing but the October cold seeping through my coat. A woman approached me as people began dispersing toward their cars. "Excuse me," she said, her tone pleasant but dismissive. "Do you know where the reception is being held? I'm supposed to follow the family, but I've lost track." "The Bennett House," I said, 47 Woodland Drive. "Thank you." She started to walk away, then paused. "Are you at the funeral home?" She thought I was staff. "No," I said quietly. "I'm his daughter." Her face went red. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I thought—" "It's fine." She fled toward her car. I stood there for a moment longer, watching my father's grave, and realized this was it. This was my closure. Being mistaken for hired help at my own father's funeral. The reception at the house was worse. 200 people filled the Bennett home, eating catered food, drinking expensive wine, telling stories about Richard Bennett the visionary, the leader, the mentor. Not a single person spoke to me. They clustered around Victoria, offering support, asking how she was holding up, discussing the future of the company. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. Mrs. Chen found me in the kitchen. "Miss Rachel." She pressed a plate of food into my hands. "You should eat." "I'm not hungry." "Your Aunt Claire would have been proud of you. For coming back. For staying." Mrs. Chen's eyes were kind. She always said you were the brave one. My throat tightened. "I wish she were here. She loved you very much. More than you know." Mrs. Chen squeezed my hand. "Don't forget that." Before I could ask what she meant, someone called her back to the kitchen. I found Victoria an hour later, finally alone in my father's study. "I'm leaving," I said from the doorway. She looked up, exhausted. "Now?" "Yeah. I've got school on Monday. I need to get back." "Rachel." She stood, seemed about to say something, then stopped. "Thank you. For coming. For staying. I know it wasn't easy. Take care of yourself, Victoria. You too." She hesitated. Maybe we could stay in touch?" "I know it's complicated, but we're sisters. We're all that's left." I looked at her. Polished, perfect Victoria, who'd gotten everything and somehow still looked lost, and felt something soften. "Maybe," I said. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a no. I left the Bennett house for what I thought would be the last time. I flew back to Oregon the next morning, returned to my 8th graders and their essays on To Kill a Mockingbird. Returned to my tiny apartment and my folding table desk and my small, quiet life. I tried to forget the Bennett family existed. I tried to let go of the daughter I'd been and the father who'd never loved her. I tried to move on. That lasted exactly 42 days. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 42 days after my father's funeral. 42 days of grading papers and teaching To Kill a Mockingbird and pretending the Bennett family was something that had happened to someone else a long time ago. I found it in my mailbox between a credit card offer and a flyer for the yoga studio downstairs. Cream-colored envelope, expensive paper. The return address read, Morrison and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Boston, Massachusetts. My first thought was that it was something about my father's estate, some tax document Victoria needed me to sign, some final piece of paperwork confirming that I'd walked away from any claim to the Bennett fortune. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it standing in my tiny kitchen, still holding my bag from school. Dear Ms. Rachel Bennett, this office represents the estate of Claire Elizabeth Bennett, who passed away on February 14th of this year. We are contacting you regarding provisions in her last will and testament that require your attention. Ms. Bennett's will contained a delayed execution clause, triggered by the death of her brother, Richard Bennett. As you may be aware, Richard passed away on October 28th. This has activated certain provisions in Claire's estate that pertain directly to you. We would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance. Please contact our office to arrange a time. Sincerely, Susan Morrison, Esquire. I read it 3 times. Claire's estate, provisions that pertained to me, inheritance. But Victoria had said, at the house, standing in the foyer, that Aunt Claire left everything to some art foundation, that there was nothing for the family, that it was typical Claire to donate everything to strangers. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring. Morrison and Associates. This is Susan Morrison. Hi, this is Rachel Bennett. I just received a letter from your office about my aunt's estate. Miss Bennett. Her voice warmed immediately. Thank you for calling so quickly. I'm glad the letter reached you. I know this must come as a surprise. I'm confused, actually. My sister told me Aunt Claire left everything to charity. That was the public will, yes. A substantial portion of Claire's estate did go to the Massachusetts Arts Foundation. But there was also a private trust. A second will, if you like. And that trust is for you. My heart was pounding. I don't understand. Why would she have 2 wills? Claire was very specific about her wishes. She wanted the private trust to remain confidential until after your father's death. She predicted. Susan paused delicately. She anticipated that Richard might contest any inheritance left directly to you while he was alive. So she built in a delayed trigger. The private trust could only be executed after both she and Richard had passed away. I sank into my folding chair. She knew. She knew what he'd do. Your aunt was a very perceptive woman, and she cared about you a great deal. How much? The question came out before I could stop it. The trust. How much is it? Another pause. Miss Bennett, I really can't discuss specific figures over the phone. Estate law requires certain protocols. But I can tell you that it's substantial. What does substantial mean? It means life-changing. Susan's voice was gentle but firm. I strongly encourage you to come to Boston so we can go through the documentation properly. There are also some personal effects. A video message. Your aunt left very detailed instructions. A video message. Claire, talking to me from beyond the grave. My eyes stung. When can you come? Susan asked. I can take a personal day on Friday. Would that work? Friday at 10 a.m. I'll email you the office address and directions. Mrs. Morrison, Susan, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you know my aunt? Personally? I did. She was a remarkable woman, creative, independent, far smarter than people gave her credit for. She talked about you often. My throat closed. She did? She was very proud of you. She said you were the only member of the Bennett family who had the courage to build a life on your own terms. Susan paused. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Bennet. Both losses. I hope Friday brings you some peace. We hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, holding the letter. Claire had left me something. Something she'd hidden from my father. Something she'd planned years in advance, knowing that Richard would try to take it from me if he could. She'd protected me, even in death. I thought about calling Victoria, about telling her I'd be in Boston on Friday, about asking if she'd known there was a second will. But something stopped me. Victoria had told me Claire left everything to charity. Had she lied? Or had she simply not known? Either way, I wasn't ready to share this yet. Not until I knew what Claire had done. Not until I understood why. I opened my laptop and booked a flight to Boston for Friday morning. This time, I didn't tell anyone I was going. Susan Morrison's office overlooked Boston Harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed sailboats cutting through gray water, the skyline glittering beyond. I stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of my Target dress and teacher's salary, and the fact that I didn't belong in rooms like this. Rachel. Susan rose from behind her desk, extending her hand. She was maybe 55, silver hair cut sharp, kind eyes behind designer glasses. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. I sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than my rent. Your aunt spoke of you often, Susan said, settling across from me. She was very proud. She said you reminded her of herself, the one who didn't quite fit the Bennet mold. My throat tightened. I wish I'd known her better. Claire understood why you had to break away. She respected that. Susan pulled a leather portfolio from her drawer. Shall we begin? I nodded. Claire Elizabeth Bennet passed away on February 14th after an 18-month battle with pancreatic cancer. She used that time to put her affairs in order very carefully. Susan opened the portfolio. She made me promise I'd handle this personally. The first document showed Claire's name embossed at the top. Claire's estate is more substantial than anyone in your family realized. She was an artist, yes, but also a brilliant investor. She bought tech stocks in the 90s, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, when no one thought a painter from Connecticut should be playing the market. She lived modestly, never flashed her wealth. Your father assumed she was scraping by. I almost smiled. That sounded exactly like Claire. At the time of her death, Claire's estate was valued at $4.6 million. My breath stopped. The public will directed $1.8 million to the Massachusetts Arts Foundation. That was the will your family saw. The will your father didn't contest because he thought that was everything, but it wasn't. No. Susan slid a document across the desk. The private trust activated after your father's death. It's designated entirely to you. I stared at my name on the paper. Investment portfolio at Fidelity, $2.8 million. Beach house in Cape Cod, fully paid, $800,000. Art collection, $200,000. Susan paused. Total assets directed to Rachel Ann Bennet, $3.8 million. The room spun. I gripped the chair arms. Rachel, breathe. I breathed. Why would she? Why me? She left you a video message. Would you like to see it? I nodded, tears already forming. Susan turned her laptop toward me and pressed play. The screen showed a living room bathed in soft light. And there, in a wingback chair, was Aunt Claire, thinner than I remembered. Hair cropped short, growing back in patches from chemo. But her eyes, bright, sharp, alive. Rachel, my darling girl. Her voice cracked. If you're watching this, it means two things. I'm gone, and so is my brother. She smiled, and I started crying. Your father never understood you. He thought success meant money and power. He couldn't see that leaving at 19, walking away from everything he offered, took more courage than anything Victoria ever did. She stayed because it was easy. You left because it was right. Claire leaned forward. You built a life on your terms. You teach kids to love reading. You chose work that matters over work that pays. That's not failure, sweetheart. That's bravery. And I've been so proud of you. I sobbed. Susan pushed tissues toward me. I died before Richard, Claire continued. 8 months before. And I knew what he'd do when his time came. He'd cut you out. He'd give everything to Victoria. He'd punish you one last time for refusing to be molded. Her expression hardened. So I waited. I structured this trust to activate only after he died. I wanted you to experience his rejection fully, not because you deserved that pain, but because I needed you to be absolutely certain that his failure to see your worth was his failure, not yours. Claire's eyes glistened. You were never worthless, Rachel. You were never the problem. You were always enough. She paused, gathering herself. This money is yours because you're my niece, and I love you. Because you walked away from a family that couldn't appreciate you and built something beautiful anyway. Because when I look at you, I see who I wish I'd been brave enough to become. Claire wiped her eyes. Build something with this. Something that matters to you. Travel. Start a scholarship fund for kids whose parents cut them off. Whatever you do, don't let Richard's voice win. Don't let his limited imagination define what your life can be. She smiled through tears. I love you, sweetheart. I always did. I always will. Be brave. Be yourself. And know that someone saw you, really saw you, and thought you were magnificent. The screen went black. I couldn't stop crying. Great gasping sobs that shook my entire body. Susan sat quietly, letting me break open. Finally, when I could breathe, I whispered, She knew. She knew exactly what he'd do. She did. And she made sure you'd be okay. Susan slid the tissue box closer. Claire spent 2 years planning this. Making sure the trust was airtight. Making sure your father couldn't contest it. Making sure you'd get every penny. I stared at the blank screen. She protected me. She loved you. Susan handed me a folder. These are the account documents. The deed to the Cape House. The art inventory. Everything is yours, free and clear. No taxes owed. Claire structured it as a grantor trust, no strings attached. I took the folder with shaking hands. There's a check in there. From the liquid assets. You can deposit it whenever you're ready. The house is yours as soon as you sign the transfer papers. $3.8 million. A beach house. Freedom. And most importantly, the knowledge that someone had seen me, had believed in me, had loved me enough to plan for years to make sure I knew my worth. Susan. My voice was hoarse. Thank you. For keeping Claire's secret. For everything. It was an honor. Your aunt was remarkable. Susan smiled. And so are you. I left the office 2 hours later, leather folder under my arm, check for $3.8 million in my purse. The city moved around me. Tourists, business people, students. And I stood on the sidewalk, feeling October sun on my face, understanding something I'd spent 38 years trying to learn. I'd never been the problem. My father's cruelty, his rejection, his inability to see me, that had never been about my worth. It had always been about his limitations. And now, thanks to Aunt Claire, I was free. I called Victoria from my hotel room that night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted her to know. Maybe I needed to share it with someone who understood what it meant. Maybe I just didn't want to carry this secret alone anymore. She answered on the third ring. Rachel? Where are you? I tried calling yesterday. I'm in Boston. I just came from Aunt Claire's attorney. Silence. Claire's attorney? I thought that was all settled. The Art Foundation got everything. That was the public will. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, looking out at the city lights. There was a private trust. For me, I heard her breath catch. What do you mean, a private trust? Claire left me money. A lot of money. And a house. And my voice cracked. And a video message explaining why. How much? Victoria's voice had gone very quiet. Does it matter? How much, Rachel? $3.8 million. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Victoria? She knew. Victoria's voice was tight, strained. She knew what Dad was going to do. She knew he'd cut you out. And she just let it happen. Let him humiliate you. So she could swoop in after and... It wasn't like that. I stood up, pacing. She wanted me to know the truth. About Dad. About what he thought of me. And then she wanted me to know that he was wrong. You got millions of dollars for being the family disappointment, Victoria said bitterly. I got a company I can't run and a father who's dead and... Her voice broke. I got nothing that actually matters. Tori. Don't. She was crying now. Don't try to make me feel better about this. You won. Aunt Claire loved you more. She saw you as the worthy one. And I'm just the trained monkey who did what Daddy wanted and got rewarded with a business I'm destroying. I closed my eyes. What do you mean, destroying? Bennett Financial is hemorrhaging money, Rachel. Clients are leaving. The board questions every decision I make. I'm 35 years old and I'm running a company I have no idea how to lead because Dad never actually taught me. He just put me in the position and expected me to figure it out. She laughed bitterly. 3 months. I've been CEO for 3 months, and I've already lost 2 major accounts. The board is talking about a vote of no confidence. I'm going to lose everything Dad left me because I was never actually qualified for any of it. I was just the daughter who stayed. My heart broke for her. I'm sorry. Are you? The question was sharp. You got everything you wanted. Claire validated you, gave you millions. You get to walk away knowing you were right all along. I didn't want this, Victoria. I just wanted him to see me. Well, congratulations. Someone finally did. I could have hung up. Could have let her anger push me away. But I heard something beneath the bitterness. Pain. Loneliness. The same grief I'd been carrying, just in a different shape. Dad didn't do you any favors, I said quietly. Giving you everything. Making you his successor. You're right. He never taught you. He just handed you a company and expected you to be him. Victoria was silent, but I could hear her breathing. He never really saw either of us, did he? I continued. You were the golden child, but only if you performed exactly right. I was the disappointment because I wouldn't. He didn't love us. He loved the idea of who we should be. I miss him anyway, Victoria whispered. How pathetic is that? He was terrible, and I still miss him. That's not pathetic. That's human. We sat with that for a moment, connected by phone and grief, and the wreckage of Richard Bennett's legacy. I don't want your money, Victoria said finally. If that's why you called... I didn't call to offer money. I called because... I paused, trying to find the words. Because you're my sister. And maybe we don't know each other very well, and maybe it's too late to fix what Dad broke. But you said at the funeral that we're all that's left. And I think maybe you were right. Rachel, I'm not saying we're suddenly going to be close. I'm just saying, if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it was like growing up in that house, being measured against impossible standards, I'm here. Victoria was quiet for a long time. The company is going to collapse, she said finally. I can feel it. I'm not strong enough to save it. Maybe you're not supposed to save it. Maybe Dad's empire dies with him, and that's okay. It's all I have. No, it's not. You have a law degree. You have skills. You have your whole life ahead of you. I sat back down on the bed. You don't have to be Richard Bennett's daughter anymore. Neither of us do. She laughed softly, sadly. Easier said than done. I know. Another long pause. Can I? Victoria's voice was small. Can I call you? Sometimes? Not about money, just to talk? Yes. Okay. She exhaled shakily. Okay, I should go. But Rachel? Yeah? I'm glad Claire left you the money. I'm glad someone in this family saw you. She paused. I should have seen you too. I'm sorry I didn't. My throat closed. Thank you. Good night, Rachel. Good night. We hung up. I sat in my hotel room, $3.8 million richer, and realized that the most valuable thing I'd gotten today wasn't the money. It was the possibility, fragile, uncertain, complicated, that maybe someday I might have a sister again. 6 months after Aunt Claire's will reading, my life looked nothing like it had. I'd quit my full-time teaching position in March. Not because I didn't love it, I did. But because I'd spent 15 years living small, playing it safe, making sure I never needed anyone's help. Claire's inheritance gave me permission to dream bigger. I paid off my student loans, all $32,000 of them gone in a single payment. Then I bought a house. Nothing extravagant, just a 3-bedroom craftsman in the same Oregon neighborhood I'd been renting in. I could have bought something bigger, fancier, but I didn't need a mansion. I needed a home. The rest of the money went into something that mattered, the Second Chances Scholarship Fund. That's what I named it, for students whose families cut them off financially, for kids who chose their own path and got punished for it, for 19-year-olds who heard you're on your own and had to figure out how to survive anyway. I hired a small team, 3 people who handled applications, vetting, fund distribution. We launched in February. By August, we'd awarded 50 scholarships, full rides, 4-year commitments, no strings attached except one requirement: pass it forward someday, when you can. One girl wrote me a letter. Her parents disowned her for being gay. She was studying social work at Portland State. She said our scholarship was the only reason she didn't drop out. I cried reading it. This was what Claire wanted. Not revenge, not luxury. Something that transformed pain into purpose. Victoria and I texted occasionally, short messages, careful. How are you? Hanging in there. You? Same. The company had collapsed exactly as she'd predicted. 3 months after our phone call, the board forced her out. They sold Bennett Financial Group to a larger competitor. Victoria got a severance package, enough to live on, not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown up with. She moved to a smaller town in Vermont, got a job as a financial consultant. Nothing glamorous, nothing CEO level, just work. She seemed lighter in her texts, tired, but lighter. I'm not running Dad's empire anymore, she wrote once. Turns out I don't miss it as much as I thought I would. When my father's house sold, the 6-bedroom colonial on 2 acres, Victoria called me. The proceeds are $400,000 after estate fees, she said. I want to split it with you. 50-50. Victoria, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Dad gave you nothing. I got everything. This is me trying to, I don't know, make it right. I accepted. Not because I needed the money, but because I understood what she was offering. Not payment, repair. I donated my half, $200,000, to the scholarship fund. Victoria didn't ask what I did with it, but a week later, she texted. That's what Claire would have wanted. She was right. I visited the Cape Cod house in May. Claire had left it fully furnished. Whitewashed walls, gauze curtains, art everywhere. Her own paintings mixed with pieces she'd collected. The house smelled like salt air and old books and somehow, impossibly, like her. I walked to her grave at the small cemetery a mile down the road, brought flowers, sat on the grass beside her headstone. "I did it, Grandma Claire," I whispered. Even though she wasn't my grandmother, that's what I'd started calling her in my head. I didn't let his voice win. The wind rustled through the pine trees. 50 kids are going to college because of you. Because you saw me. Because you loved me enough to make sure I knew my worth. I traced her name carved in granite. Claire Elizabeth Bennett. Artist. Visionary. Free spirit. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." I still teach sometimes. Volunteer at the local middle school, running a creative writing workshop twice a week. Because Aunt Claire was right, teaching kids to love reading isn't failure. It never was. I'm just doing it on my own terms now. My father's voice still creeps in occasionally, late at night, when I'm tired. "You'll never amount to anything. You wasted your potential. You're not building something real." But now I have Claire's voice too. "You chose work that matters over work that pays. That's not failure. That's bravery." And I have evidence. 50 scholarships, 3 employees, a fund that's changing lives. I built something real. Just not the thing my father would have recognized. 6 months after Claire's will reading, I understood what freedom actually meant. It wasn't the money, though the money helped. It was the knowledge that I'd been enough all along, that my worth had never depended on Richard Bennett's approval, that walking away at 19 wasn't running, it was surviving, and that sometimes the family that saves you isn't the one you're born into. It's the one that chooses to see you. If you're still with me, thank you for listening. Here's what I learned. And maybe it'll help you too. Your worth isn't determined by who chooses you. My father didn't choose me. For 15 years, that felt like proof I was worthless. But Aunt Claire chose me, and more importantly, I chose myself. Your worth isn't something someone else gets to decide. Not your parents, not your family, not anyone. It's something you know, even when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. Walking away is not failure. At 19, I left with $2,000 and a suitcase. My father called it weakness. Aunt Claire called it courage. She was right. Walking away from people who diminish you, who make you small, who love you only when you fit their mold. That's not giving up. That's survival. That's choosing yourself. If you've walked away from family, I see you. Leaving was the bravest thing you could have done. Money can't fix wounds, but it can build futures. The $3.8 million didn't erase 15 years of pain, but it let me turn that pain into something good. 50 students are in college right now because I decided their story wouldn't end the way mine almost did. That's not revenge. That's transformation. Family isn't just blood. Aunt Claire was more of a parent than my father ever was. She saw me. She believed in me. She protected me even after she was gone. Family is about who shows up, who sees you, who loves you for who you are, not what you achieve. If your blood family can't do that, you're allowed to find family elsewhere. I think about my father sometimes. Wonder if he regretted it. I'll never know. He died thinking he'd won, and maybe that's its own tragedy. I don't hate him. I just don't let him define me anymore. Victoria and I text occasionally, brief, careful, but honest. She's building a life that's hers now, not our father's. I hope she finds peace. I live in Oregon. I run a scholarship fund. I volunteer teaching kids to love stories. I'm building a life Aunt Claire would be proud of. My father's voice is still there sometimes, telling me I'll never be enough. But Claire's voice is louder now. You were always enough. If you're the family disappointment, the one who left, the one who doesn't fit, I see you. You are not what they said you were. You never were. Walking away is not failure, it's freedom. If this story meant something to you, share it. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever walked away from family? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'm Rachel, and I'm finally free.